there, and welcome to Your Worth Your Way, the podcast that's all about helping you understand that you are worthy of prioritizing your own joy without feeling selfish or guilty. I'm Debbie Lucas, the Joy Alchemist, and each week I'll be bringing you honest, heartfelt conversations with incredible guests, coaches, thought leaders, and soulful humans who'll share their stories and insights on self-worth, confidence, personal growth, and how to create a life that feels authentically yours. This isn't about quick fixes or cookie cutter advice. It's about real talk, practical takeaways, and plenty of soulful inspiration to help you live life your way. So grab your favorite cuppa, get comfy, and let's dive into today's episode. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Anouska Tetley, who is a trauma-led hypnotherapist dedicated to helping people heal from past experiences and regain control of their lives. Using compassionate and tailored approach, she guides clients through deep transformation, empowering them to move forward with confidence. And today, she joins us to share her insights and power of hypnotherapy in trauma recovery. And I'd like to take a deeper dive today, Anouska, into self-trust as a foundation of self-worth, because that's what this podcast is all about. And I know that you like to talk about how our past experiences can impact on our ability to trust ourselves and to rebuild that trust in ourselves. So welcome. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led to the work that you're doing today.
Hi, Debbie. So as you said, I am a trauma-informed therapist, and predominantly I lean towards hypnotherapy as a therapeutic intervention, but I am an integrated therapist who specializes in trauma-informed care. So what that looks like essentially is that I bring in lots of different therapeutic tools, whether that's traditional talking therapy in order to help people work through their trauma from childhood, or I might use some parts therapy and inner child therapy in order to help people heal and to find their self-worth, essentially. The people that I tend to work with have experienced adverse childhood experiences. And it could be that they've experienced one or that they've experienced a myriad of those experiences. And through understanding the neurobiology behind that and how trauma affects the brain helps us to reprocess those adverse childhood experiences and to help people grow.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it's wonderful that you use, you've got so many different modalities that you can use to help people because, as we know in the kind of helping and healing world, one size doesn't fit all. And that's something that I talk about a lot as well, that, it's not about having a set strategy or framework that you work through that's going to give you the end result of being, complete or healed or achieving your goals. It's about kind of going with what works for you. Yeah. And I think, my background is in social work, as you know, and, I dealt a lot with the kind of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they like to call it as well. But, it just takes one thing that could shape your entire life. And the bit that I love about, hypnotherapy and hypnosis is that it kind of taps straight into your unconscious mind. So all those blocks and filters that are sitting around that can, prevent you from really kind of healing those traumas is kind of bypassed in a way and helps to kind of heal on a deeper level because, talking therapy and counseling has its place, absolutely. And I've used that myself over the years, but sometimes it kind of only touches on the superficial because your mind is blocked at that. So
absolutely. And on that, if we look at the neurobiology and part of what I do with people is that psychoeducation around what it is that I'm actually delivering. If we look at the neurobiology and when we talk about the mind, we are actually talking about specific regions within the brain. So when we're talking about our conscious mind or our rational critical thinking part of our brain, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our executive decision making. When we're talking about the subconscious mind, essentially what we are looking at is the primal part of the brain, in particular the amygdala and the hippocampus, the regions that are responsible for both our fight or flight mechanism and also our memory processing. And often in the case of ACEs, what we find is that the amygdala is heightened, it's in hyperarousal more often than not. and that the hippocampus, the librarian, if you like, section of our brain has incorrectly filed some of those memories, so that, for example, if you have somebody who experienced verbal abuse as an example, and they were told that they were worthless repeatedly as children, the librarian, the hippocampus, essentially believes that to be true and that to be part of their reality. And with hypnotherapy, what we're doing is we're bypassing that executive function of the brain, which we can liken to a CEO. And we are talking directly with the amygdala and the hippocampus. As I said, the librarian, the amygdala, we can liken that to a security officer. And in order to do that, we can then reprocess those memories and learn that actually what we were told through those adverse childhood experiences, if it were verbal abuse as an example, that's not true, and look at the further history of an individual to understand where their strengths lie, where their values lie, and how they've actually already overcome that themselves. So that's the power of hypnotherapy, is that it gives us direct access to that part of the brain that essentially is in command of all of our decisions.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, the brain is an absolutely fascinating organ, meta computer, whatever you want to call it. But I think, you know, when you were talking there, what was coming up for me was the whole kind of nature versus nurture debate, because I know, like, you know, even siblings growing up in the same household with the same parents and the same experiences, like there is the amygdala, the library part of the brain, like they'll store those memories differently. And like
Absolutely.
I know, even with like my sister, like our memories of certain things, good, bad, or indifferent, are so different. You know, like I'll say, do you remember this? And she's like, I know, but I remember it in this way. And I think that's where, you know, that's where we need to treat individuals as unique. And like, as I said before, like where it's not one size fits all.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that you were talking about there as well, like, you know, like the stories or the beliefs that we hold that are shaped from our childhood experiences, again, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I like to do when I'm working with clients is like, you know, whose story is it? Is it something that, you know, because sometimes it's something that somebody told you like over and over again, like you're not good at sports, for example, or whatever. And you've kind of internalized that and it's become part of your identity. But sometimes it could just be your experience and the way that that memory or that situation is remembered in your mind and in your body that has shaped it. And you can't even say, oh, it was my mum or my dad or my friend or my brother or my sister who gave me this story. So how do you help people kind of sift through that and kind of identify what was genuinely something that kind of happened and something that's just a story that they've made up for themselves? And I don't mean that it's not true, it's just a belief that
it's I guess it's that kind of perception, isn't it, and what their perspective was at that time. And going back to what you were saying about siblings, you know, you're absolutely right in that we all experience our surroundings in a different way. And also, you know, one conversation that I do find myself having quite often with clients is that your parents, let's say your main caregivers as an example, weren't the same parents that they were for you as they were for your siblings, so you are naturally going to have different experiences in that sense. But to come back to your question, so yes, one thing that I explore with clients is whose voice it is that they're hearing and identifying that. And in part it could be that they're hearing the voice of a main caregiver or an authoritative figure like a teacher, for example. It could also be that they're hearing their internalized child voice over their adult voice. And we explore that really gently through inner child therapy. One of my favorite things to do with my clients is to get a sand tray out and to get lots of little animals and trees and shells and things out to help bring out that inner child within them. And it's really surprising what can kind of come out of playing with some sand as an adult, and to identify, you know, what those parts are essentially that are making up that internalized voice for them. And more often than not, that comes out through play. So yeah, that's one way, but it's a series, you know, it's therapy. It isn't a magic wand, and it does take time, and it's building up that rapport with people, essentially, that, you know, then opens and is a catalyst for looking at those different perspectives that they have been subjected to throughout their life, and then experiences that they've had throughout their entire life, you know, not just through childhood, because lots of, you know, one thing that I always say to people is that we are a product of our experiences. That is our reality. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but through all of those experiences that we have, we accumulate an idea of what our reality is.
And like touching on the whole inner child work, because that's something that's come up a few times with guests and podcasts. Yeah. I think, what would you see, what role does the inner child play in our ability to learn to trust ourselves and feel worthy again?
I think if we have, being that I'm trauma informed, you know, generally that's what I'm working with. And, you know, there is a part of us, our inner child, which we all have, which clings to past trauma. And, you know, quite often you explore how your clients are stuck. So, you know, some clients might come to me and say, well, I'm stuck at when I was 16 years old. You know, I was incredibly badly bullied at school. I wasn't emotionally supported at home, and I don't seem to be able to get past that. And my behaviors as an adult, you know, in my late 40s, early 50s, reflects that. And that's, again, because part of that internal processing of those memories is literally stuck back in that time, because those files haven't been categorized properly, if you like, by the librarian. So our inner child and that inner voice is incredibly important in terms of therapeutic intervention. And with trauma-led care, generally it follows a 3-step process. So the first step within trauma-led care is to ensure that the person that you're working with feels safe, and that they are stabilized. And we do that through somatic work. We do that through stress release work, breath work, and explore self-care rituals that can easily be built in at the initial stage. The second stage generally is that identification of where these internal beliefs have come from that are you know, impacting negative behaviors, which generally includes inner child work. Your third stage is integration, which is where you're looking at really kind of building the person up and empowering them and working on their self-esteem and their self-worth at that point. And that's kind of the trauma-informed route that we take.
I love that you touched on the kind of nervous system regulation part of feeling safe, because you know, that's something that I found, like, you know, a lot of times people will come to me and they'll be like, you know, I want to do this, this, and this, and this, and they're kind of like so focused on the goals, and I'm like, no, let's go back. Really kind of, you know, regulate, and like, so, you know, like I use breath work and somatics and all the rest of it, and tapping is a great way to do that as well. But I think, you know, it's you know, for those people who know Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something that I, you know, my social work training is something that we focused on a lot, because unless you have that fundamental bit of feeling safe, absolutely, and feeling safe in your body, like you're always going to kind of get pulled back from, you know, you might make a little bit of progress, but you're always going to get pulled back to that. So that's so important, isn't it?
Incredibly important. You know, most people, when they, particularly in trauma-led therapy, most people, when they embark on that journey, in terms of their vagal state, they are usually in that fight or flight or sympathetic nervous system, or in the dorsal state, which is our shutdown state, you know, complete withdrawal and immobilization with fear. When we're looking at the sympathetic nervous state, we're looking at mobilization with fear. And the role that I take is to get them into their parasympathetic nervous system, which essentially is the healing room. And it's in there that we can access those parts of the brain that I spoke about before and instill that sense of safety.
Absolutely. And that's so important, like that people feel safe with the person who's helping them as well. And that's why,
Absolutely.
I always say on this podcast and with my guests as well, the part of the reason I do this podcast is to kind of amplify the work that we do, to let people know that there are all these people out there. This is episode, gosh, I think it's 29 or 30 that I'm recording
Okay.
with you. That's 30 plus me, 31 people
Yeah.
now introduced to the world that people might not have known about. Because I always say, if they resonate with you, if my audience resonate with you and want to work with you, amazing, I've given them. So if they want to work with me, great, that's fine. But I think it's so important that because my guests have been so varied with different modalities and different approaches, but the ultimate bit is that the client feels safe with you. Because if you can't hold them in that really vulnerable state, and you feel safe in that, then the relationship's not going to work and the healing's not going to take place, will it?
No, absolutely. And I think it's something like 80% of therapeutic intervention is actually the rapport that you have with the therapist.
Yeah.
Beyond the actual therapeutic intervention work, it is your relationship that you have with your therapist that is of paramount importance.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's given you, perhaps that person that you needed during those traumatic experiences. And I want to come back to the trauma part in a bit, but and I think the whole bit that I love about inner child work is that it's about helping the other person to kind of almost be that person for their inner child themselves, give them the tools and the
Absolutely.
skills to do that. Because therapists shouldn't be a lifelong relationship and rapport
No.
if we're doing our jobs well enough, or a coach or whatever it is. But it's about, I always like to empower people, and that's all my guests have been in the same kind of train of thinking. It's about empowering the person, giving them the tools and the skills and that kind of scaffolding and foundation to then go off into the world. And they might need to come back sometimes, to kind of check in
There
and
is a
stuff.
safety net. There is a safety net, and that's part of our role, isn't it? Is that the relationship doesn't necessarily come to like an abrupt end, but actually we're there. We can still contain them if need, as and when required, and if needed. And that's that is something that I found over the last decade of doing this, that every now and again people will just be like, well, I just need that validation, essentially, to know that what I'm doing, the way that I'm feeling is correct, and to be able to facilitate and hold that for people is beyond wonderful. And you're right, with regards to the inner child therapy. So part of the kind of the primary visualization that I use with people through hypnotherapy when embarking on inner child work is seeing their inner child, generally in a state of joy, before revisiting the reasons why they're with me, but giving their inner child a hug as their adult self. And that's such a cathartic exercise for people.
So powerful.
To be there for their child self and to be the person that they needed at that time, because they have it within them.
Absolutely. And that's, I've done that exercise in different shapes and forms over the years, and it is so powerful. I can feel my heart kind of opening up there when you were speaking about that. But I wanted to come back to trauma, because you've mentioned that quite a lot. And I think people often think of trauma as trauma with a capital T, so a catastrophic event, or it's a kind of an ongoing thing that causes trauma. But sometimes trauma with a small t, as I like to call it, it's not necessarily like an abusive parent, or as I said, a catastrophic event, or particular situation of abuse or something like that. So how do you see trauma kind of playing out for people in different shapes and forms?
So I think predominantly, unfortunately, the cases of people that have experienced ACEs is incredibly high. And And, you know, funny enough, Debbie, I didn't kind of, when I retrained and decided to become a therapist, I didn't have it within my mind that I was going to become a trauma specialist. What I really wanted to work with was hypnobirthing. But very quickly it became apparent that the majority of people that came to me had experienced trauma of some kind. And very quickly, I realized that actually, okay, I need to do some more training in this area because it is so prevalent. You know, it's 1 in 4 people that have been subjected to ACEs, which is an incredibly high statistic. So, but kind of with regards to those traumas with a little t, I would go back to one of my experiences as a child, which really sticks out for me. And that was being in the infant school. So, you know, no older than the age of 7, reaching for what I thought was my mum's hand at the time, looking up and seeing it as a different lady, and being quite shocked and feeling really vulnerable in that moment. So I would call that a little t. You know, that's not a huge traumatic event, but through doing my own work, my own healing, I realized that part of that that little trauma moment actually was a catalyst in terms of fear of abandonment for myself, because the person that I thought was meant to be there wasn't there. So, you know, it's not abuse. You know, it really is a very small trauma with a little t. And I think as well, you know, we've got used to the vernacular that when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, like a one-off event. And what we are kind of understanding more and more now is that there can be lots of little multiple traumas throughout a person's history, and that actually we're looking at cases of complex trauma. Interestingly, complex trauma isn't within the diagnostic and statistical manual. So many people potentially have been wrongly diagnosed with neurodivergence over the years, because the symptoms of CPTSD, neurodivergence are very similar, in particular ADHD, which is obviously quite an on vogue topic at the moment. So I think kind of with the exploration of that and understanding more about CPTSD, we're seeing more and more cases of that coming forward now.
Yeah, and certainly my experience as a social worker, and certainly as a coach now, like I see that, you know, it's that dysregulation that comes because, and that, but then we spoke earlier about not feeling safe. So it's like, you know, the brain is just like firing all over the place and quite chaotic. And I think that's why it's so important to start with that kind of like, let's just get to a center point. And now my perimenopausal brain is kicked in, because I don't understand what you were saying.
We both said both of our perimenopausal brains would kick in at some point.
I think, so I'm back to it now. So you're talking about like the complex trauma and what I would say compounded trauma, because sometimes there's lots of different events, little different events, but absolutely. I talk a lot about the self-worth loop and what we know about the brain and the unconscious mind is it's always looking for evidence of what you believe. So if you've had that one incident like you described there, that kind of like fear of abandonment, but that when you were little, where you reached for your mum's hand and it was another woman, you know, your kind of mind starts looking for situations that reinforce that belief or that fear, and you know, it then comes compounded over time and over your lifetime, and so you get stuck in that loop. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast with people who listen regularly. They'll have heard it before, but I talk about the law of polarity, something I work with a lot, because you know, if this is true, then the opposite is also true. So the same with the self-worth loop. When I'm working with somebody, I'm like, wait, but you can also then look for and find good reinforcing opposite you know, situations and people, and so, you know, we can spin the loop the other way kind of thing.
Absolutely.
The more we strengthen that, the more we kind of reinforce that, and that's really, and we're not talking about manifestation, that's really what manifestation is that you then start looking for the evidence of you know, whatever it is that you desire, and within your current reality and the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And now my perimenopausal brain is kicking in. Um, yeah, you know, we can look at the worst case scenario, can't we, versus the best case scenario, and that's something that I work with people who are suffering with high levels of anxiety as a result of trauma, and again looking at those polarities between that. And you know, really helpfully, we are wired as human beings to err more on the negative side, and to look for those negativities, because you know, hundreds of years ago, millions of years ago, we had to have that fight or flight mechanism within us. We had to be aware of, you know, a hungry lion coming over the valley or another tribe coming over the valley. So we were constantly scanning for potential threats. We now live in one of the safest times of history, but our brains, particularly the primal brain, is still wired back to when we were cave dwellers. So that education around, okay, you know, life, you know, great misfortunes do happen, and then amazing things happen, like those great lottery wins. Generally speaking, though, life happens somewhere in the middle. It's not the great misfortunes all the time, and it's not the amazing lottery wins all the time, well, not for many of us, you know. And it's understanding and that re-education and looking at the proof and the facts of individuals' life that support that hypothesis that life happens somewhere in the middle, and that whilst we are programmed to err on the side of caution and negativity, actually that biological function doesn't serve us so well on a day-to-day basis anymore.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that actually kind of really segues lovely into one of the questions I was going to ask around how we begin to rebuild trust in ourselves after years of self-abandonment and second guessing. And so I talk a lot about intuition, and I've got a new free intuition quiz that I'm promoting as well, to kind of really help you understand, you know, how much do you trust your intuition? And it's a conversation I've had with the previous guests as well in greater depth around, like, a lot of times there's either fear or intuition driving us. So if we're saying no to something that we want, not no to a person, I'm not talking about the people pleasing, but if we want to do something, let's say like when I was wanting to resign from my day job back at the start of this year, I had to really sit with, I wanted, I was afraid to do it.
Sure.
But was the fear, so I could have easily said, oh, my intuition is telling me this is not the right thing for me.
Yeah.
Or was it actually just the fear of stepping into the unknown? And I've got goosebumps now as I'm talking through that. I remember it so vividly, and I had to sit for a lot of time, and I did pages and pages of journaling and meditation with this. And what came with the download that I had at the time was there's endless possibilities in the unknown. So for me, it was the fear of the unknown and taking that step. It wasn't my intuition going, no, this is not the right thing for you. The day job. And, you know, because that bit around, like you were talking about the caveman days, and you know, it's about staying safe and staying in the familiar, because we know what to expect, and even if it's not great, even if we're not 100% happy, it's safe for us. So how do you kind of help people to really kind of identify whether it's genuinely their intuition saying this is not the right thing for me, this doesn't feel good, and it's actually just fear and that kind of caveman brain speaking?
Yeah. So one of my favorite lines with my clients is, let's drop into the gut. What is the gut telling you right now? Or if people are looking to make a decision and that fear is coming forward, it's understanding where they're feeling that in their body and what physiological symptoms they have that sits alongside that. And through that exploration, we're looking at whether people are following their intuition or whether they are being held back by fear. And you know, this can happen over a course of sessions, but it's and also holding up a mirror in front of people and saying, okay, you know, you're not an actual mirror in terms of the questions that are asked. You know, what would you in 5 years' time, the you in 5 years' time, if you were sat having a conversation with yourself right now, what would you in 5 years' time, what decision would that you in 5 years' time be wanting the you here in the present day to make? And what kind of sits right with you? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, as examples of how we explore that? But it really is about kind of dropping into those feelings, getting out of here,
Yes.
getting out of the head and just feeling what your body tells you, because our intuition knows the answer before our head knows the answer, and being led by our heart. What does your heart truly desire within this situation or the decision that you're trying to make, rather than that fear response that is an innate part of us.
No, absolutely. And I love that you brought in heart at the end there, because I was going to say the same thing, that, I work a lot with the heart chakra and the heart space, because when it feels right, even if it's scary, it feels expansive. You can just feel it. And when it's not, when it doesn't feel right, and I'm not talking about fear, but intuitively, when it doesn't feel right, it feels contracting. It feels like you can kind of feel yourself. Sometimes I've actually felt myself pushing back in my chair, like
absolutely, or bringing your shoulders forward and haunching over. And that's that dorsal state. When I mentioned the polyvagal theory earlier, or the central nervous system, we're going into the dorsal state, we're closing in on ourselves, and we can recognize that in the way that we move our body, in the way that we hold ourselves. And again, that is immobilization with fear, when we're entering that, and our body shows where we are within that.
So much of what we were both saying there was kind of leaning towards joy, and joy kind of being, for me, the foundation of how you live your life, because it's the frequency of how we manifest. It's the frequency of how we achieve what we desire. It's not the result when we achieve what we desire. And I think, when I'm sitting with people who are stuck between, say, option A and option B, I'll always ask them, which one is going to bring you the most joy? And they might say, oh, option B, but, my partner or my friends or whatever are not going to like this. And like, but is it going to harm them? Is it maybe going to make them feel uncomfortable because you're not now, doing something that benefited them? But, as long as you're not going to be intentionally harming anybody and it brings you joy, I say go for it.
Absolutely. And I think, on that, we have an expectation that life should be black or white. There are many shades of gray, and there are other considerations, obviously, to make life, around family, as an example, when we're looking to find joy. But ultimately, if we don't have that joy within ourselves, we can't pour from an empty cup, and we can't give of ourselves to those people that are important to us. And again, dropping into that intuition and understanding what it is that brings you joy is vitally important in order for you to be able to pour from your own cup into others' cups as well.
Absolutely. And so, staying on the subject of joy, which is a big focus of my work and this podcast, so I always like to ask my guests, what's one way that you intentionally create joy in your everyday life? And what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to do that for themselves?
So I think, in terms of bringing joy into my own life, one thing that I like to do is to ground myself, and I do that in nature. And I try to do that most days. So you would often find me, when I'm not here in my treatment room, in a woodland somewhere or in the sea. And it's at those moments that I feel pure joy, pure authenticity, and pure connection with the world around me. With regards to others, find some joy in play, however that looks for you, whether it's similar to, me being in a forest or being in the sea, but find a way to play, find a way to bring forth that inner child, because you will find joy in that.
Absolutely. And as the saying goes, like, we don't grow old. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And that's something that resonated with me for years before I even started doing this work. So, and I think I was saying this, I think it was last podcast episode or the one before, like, nature is one of the most common themes that people answer with when I ask that question. So there really is something in that. And I, you know, as like you, I try to get out in nature quite often, but sometimes if I'm just walking with friends or whatever, it doesn't matter where I am, and I spot a tree and I'm drawn to the tree, I go and hug it. Even
I quite often have my hand on a tree telling it that it's, you know, that I'm really grateful for it.
You know, so I always just think, well, if I'm drawn to that tree, it's meant to be hugged. So
yeah, absolutely.
and I think my friends are just used to it now.
You and I should never go for a walk together because we wouldn't get very far.
I know, actually, last year I was hosting some women's circles, and we've got some woods near us, and we were there, and we just went off into the woods, and everybody found a tree, and we just stood hugging. It was so lovely.
Yeah, beautiful. Great way to release those feel-good hormones as well. You know, nature is our free prescriber. You know, our brain releases dopamine, it releases serotonin when we're out in nature.
It's great. I mean, even look at us thinking about it, we're just smiling.
Absolutely.
So even just thinking about it sometimes is enough, or you can just visualize yourself in nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
It's been absolutely amazing having you on, Anouska. You've said so many insights. And one thing that really stood out for me, there were so many, but the bit that you said about like life happens in the middle is not always about the extremes, the catastrophic, and the, you know, like the big $1 million lottery wins or whatever. And I think that really helps to put a bit of perspective around, you know, what we're going through. And you know, like there's people often jokingly say, you know, I'm only sending an email, I'm not saving a life, you know, when it comes to stress at work or whatever it is, or whatever you're doing. So I think sometimes just kind of like bringing that perspective back to like what actually is important. And it's not that life or death that we dealt with when we were cavemen. So I'm sure that my listeners want to find out more about you and what you do. So where do you hang out? Where's the best place that people can contact you? And
so you can contact me through my website, which is thinkchangehypno.co.uk, and I'm also all over social media and TikTok as well, and easy to find with the name of the business.
Brilliant. So, and I'll share all the links to that as well in the show notes. People. So thank you so much. It's been amazing having you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Your Worth, Your Way. I know that you'll be walking away feeling inspired and ready to embrace your worth and prioritize your joy. If you love this episode, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review or share it with someone who needs a little bit of encouragement today. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you never miss another episode. And you can connect with me, find out more about the podcast, my guests, and what I do at debbielucas.me/links. And if you don't already, follow me on your favorite social media platform. I'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the conversation there. And until next time, remember that you are worthy exactly as you are.